From the OG Living Studios in sunny South Florida via Nashville, Tennessee. Heard all over the world on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your streaming content. It's the Nashville Hype with your host, Paul King.
The Nashville Hype is brought to you by Fantasy Song Pitch, a place where songwriters can pitch their songs to all their favorite artists, only at fantasysongpitch.com. You're listening to the Nashville Hype with my special guest, Kirt Webster. You walked in to Merle Kilgore's office, and he said, "Who are you?" And you said, "I'm your new publicist."
That's correct.
How in the world did you find the oomph to just do that?
I had been selling T-shirts early on, my first job in Nashville. And I was on a headline tour with Clay Walker, 95, 96. And, you know, we had the Dixie Chicks and James Bonamy and Emilio and Terry Clark as opening acts, various shows. And, you know, I learned right then, you have to be aggressive. You have to go out and get what you want. Mm-hmm. If you don't, you will get run over. And so I realized after doing that for a year, it's not why I moved to town. And so I literally had to cold call people to get through the door because I did not go to Belmont. I did not go to Vanderbilt. I did not intern for a record company or a management company. So I didn't have an in already, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so therefore I had to just take everything, you know, that I wanted to do and take charge. And, and if it didn't happen, that is my own fault. If it happens, then I win. And so, well, on that tour early on, there was a girl named Lisa D, who was out selling T-shirts as well. And we got to know each other. Well, she left doing merchandise that first year and went to work at William Morris. And she became the assistant to Greg Oswald. And Greg represented at the time Leonard Skinner, Hank Jr., Lone Star, a whole plethora of artists. And she called me one day after I'd started the PR company, and she said, "Okay, Kathy Gangwish is going to be retiring in the next 2 days, and they haven't announced it yet, but they've let us know. She's been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and so all of her clients are going to come available." Oh, wow. The light bulb went off in my head. I picked up the phone. I started calling the Oak Ridge Boys manager, Jim Halsey, the Gatlin Brothers manager, all the various Don Williams, all the clients that she had, which she had a lot of the oldie but goodie acts. Mm-hmm. And I thought, perfect, right up my alley, exactly what I want to do and who I want to represent. So Hank Williams Jr. was on that list. So I cold called Merle Kilgore's office, and Kay answered the phone, Kay Knight. And I said, "Can I get an appointment with Merle?" She said, "How does 2:00 on Thursday sound?" I said, "Great." So I showed up, and he said, "What can I do you for? And what are we here to talk about?" I said, "Well, I'm your new publicist." And literally I sat down, and the first thing he said was, "Well, did you know that I wrote The Ring of Fire?" And I said, "No, Merle, tell me about that." So he went into the whole story. "Well, did you know that I wrote, Wolverton Mountain? Did you know that I was roommates with Fair and Young?" And of course, I didn't know some of these things. So all I did was open the door for him to tell me those stories. Mm-hmm. By 6 p.m., we're still sitting there. I'm hearing stories. And he said, "Let's go eat." We went and had some Mexican food over off of Elm Hill Pike. I'm out by the airport. And he said, "Come to the show tomorrow night. In Louisville, Kentucky, the Montgomery Gentry and Toby Keith are opening for Hank, and I'll introduce you." I said, "Okay." Drove to Louisville, walked on the bus. Literally, he looked at Hank and said, "This is your new publicist." And Hank looked and said, "What does he do?" And Merle said, "He gets you in the paper and things." Hank turned around, walked back to the back of the bus, and the rest was history. So, it's one of those things where you have to seize the moment. Mm-hmm. And that's what I learned early on. And so I firmly believe that that's what made me successful throughout my publicity career. Mm-hmm. Was, yes, I got a lot of no's. Yes, I got a lot of yeses, but I turned a lot of no's into yeses because of the fact that I just had tenacity and didn't give up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you and I may have met, and I don't know this for a fact because it was so many years ago, but if you were working for Clay Walker in 95 or 96, I think he was living in Hermitage at an apartment complex, like I want to recall like a white building.
Jackson Downs.
Jackson Downs, yeah.
Yes, and that was just prior to me. He had moved in 95, 96. He had moved to Hempstead, Texas. He and his wife, Lori, they had McClay, the daughter, and that was the Hypnotize the Moon tour. And they actually were living in a trailer out on this massive land plot of acres that they were building their dream home at the time in Texas.
Okay.
We Hypnotized the Moon went platinum, and we actually had our platinum album party out at his house in Hempstead, Texas.
Okay.
So that's why vividly I can remember exactly where we went and where we were. But he was prior to that in that apartment complex in Hermitage in Jackson Downs.
Yeah, I had started writing songs, I guess, in 1991, and I was hanging around people like Tracy Lawrence and Elbert West, who rest in peace, and several others. And for whatever reason, I recall him being there because I was there at the apartment. You know, you brought up Hank Williams Jr., and from what years did you represent Hank Williams?
Well, it was the Almira Club album, and I had just taken over that project, and then we did the Crossroads with Kid Rock, and it was from that point on all the way through 2017, the fall of 17.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask is, you know, he's not short of controversy, and we don't need to go in specifics of what the controversy was, but were you there and repping him when the whole Monday Night Football thing went down?
Oh, yes. We were promoting a box set that was called the Mother's Best box set for Hank Williams. And so Time Life was putting this beautiful box set that was in the shape of a WSM radio, because all of those masters recording, the master recordings and masters from the radio station that had been recorded when Hank Williams was doing live radio at the time. He would perform all his songs live, and then he would do the Mother's Best flower commercials live. And so all those things, those acetates, were thrown into a garbage, and a janitor pulled them out and kept them.
Oh, wow.
And years later, they found them at this janitor's house, and through obviously a legal battle, the courts ruled that those masters belonged back to the estate and to the family. So Jet Williams and Hank Williams became the owners of all those recordings. They licensed them to Time Life, and this beautiful box set had been released. And a lot of them were unreleased recordings, obviously, of different songs that never had come out on record. So it was like a brand new opportunity for people to hear some Hank Williams stuff.
Yeah.
So be that as it may, we booked him to do a media day to promote that project, and we booked him on Fox and Friends.
Okay.
And he was doing it via satellite, and of course, you try to preface a lot of interviews in advance by saying, you know, here are our talking points. Here are the things we want to stay away from.
Right.
You know, not everybody abides by it, but you try to give a groundwork. You know, you lay the groundwork and give some framework, if you will, on how to structure it so it comes off and everybody looks good.
Right.
Well, at the very end, you know, they happen to ask a political question. And as we know, Hank is no stranger to controversy or giving his opinion.
Right.
And so as soon as he did, literally we were sitting in the control room, and I'm like, no, this is not going there. No, this is not going there. And all of a sudden it was like, what was done was done.
Right.
and we still had 3 or 4 hours worth of interviews to do, because that was so early in the morning that we had to get through the rest of the day. So we did the rest of those interviews. He went back home. We were at the office, and the phone started ringing saying, so, you know, who is who? Who is he referring to on this part? And who is he making the analogy to? And who is he referencing? And, you know, and everybody knows he was talking about Netanyahu, John Boehner, President Obama, and Hitler, and he was talking about a golf game and how it just would be uncommon for that pairing, if you will, to be having a good time out on a golf course.
Yeah.
It didn't, the explanation and his way of saying it didn't come off the way that he was thinking it, you know, or in some cases it did, in some cases it didn't, and therefore people started making their own assumptions, and of course created a lot more controversy than really was there.
Yeah.
But it still bubbled up, and all of a sudden, he ended up losing the Monday Night Football deal. So all of that transpired throughout that weekend.
That's crazy.
On Sunday night, I'm like, how's this week going to be? That's all I could remember. Monday, I get a phone call from Hank, and he says, I want to do The View. I said, you want to do what? And he said, I want to fly to New York and do The View with Whoopi Goldberg.
Mm-hmm.
She was on the air protecting me and telling people that she understood what I said was an analogy. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah. So I called the producers and Natalie Bubness and the group there, and I said, Hank would like to come. She said, the show's booked. We're full. Let me check. Well, they came back and said, here's our problem. Barbara Walters is in London for the Paul McCartney wedding. She's flying back today. She'll be back tomorrow. She will want to be part of this segment. We have to figure this out. Needless to say, that next day, following day, we were in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
He wore a Mickey Mantle jersey because he knew that ABC and Disney owned The View.
Oh, right.
And so he was trying to make another play there. And then he called the Country Music Hall of Fame and had them pull his jacket, his Monday Night Football jacket with all the teams they had Manuel make. And he got that off of the display, and he gifted it to Whoopi in the dressing room.
Oh, wow.
And said, I want you to have this as my gift because you understood what I was saying. Be that as it may, he went on Good Morning, The View, and it was a great segment. Joy Behar loved him so much that she then said, will you stick around in New York through this afternoon, and will you come and film my show later today? I want to do a whole nother interview with you.
Oh, wow.
And he said yes. That was not pre-planned. They just had a great conversation. And here again, they're polar opposites in politics.
Right.
But they had one. But the interesting piece was they had one common ground. Mm-hmm. They truly understood what they were saying, and they had a civil conversation about it. And so we end up going over to I don't know if it was CNN or MSNBC, but she had I think it was Joy Behar Tonight or Joy Behar Live at the time. And we did 2 full segments on her show. And then we got on the plane and came back to Nashville. But it was an interesting time because that was pre where we are today in politics.
Yeah.
But yet it was just as volatile depending on what the situation was.
Were you responsible for him going back? Because I know they invited him back, I think in 2016 or something.
Yeah, it was a combination of a lot of people just saying, okay, what gives? Your ratings are down. The song is synonymous with football because of the Are You Ready for Some Football? It was synonymous with ABC's Monday Night Football. When it moved to ESPN, it had a different audience, obviously, because it was a network. But the same producers, they loved Hank. There was a long-term relationship that they had. And so they went back to the well internally to fight for us.
Oh, nice.
We had Ken Levitan, who is Hank's manager, go out and fight for us. I had my conversations. So it was a combination of a lot of people that were saying all the same thing. And eventually they said, you know what? We'll bring Jason Derulo in. We'll bring Florida Georgia Line in. Let's kind of make it a little bit of a Hank and Friends type opening. And that could be a softer way of reintroducing that back to Monday Night Football, so we don't get any pushback, kind of a thing. Yeah. And yes, we shot that here in Nashville. I believe it was 15 and 16 time period, and it hit the airwaves, and it was back on.
Yeah. Do you think you have a mistake like that, and I wouldn't call it necessarily a mistake, but something like that happens with a client of yours, and the next thing you know, 6 or 7 years later, they're still in the news. And sometimes I guess it could be a curse in a way, because it's got to be stressful. Obviously, you're in a control room, you hear something said, and you go automatically into damage control in your mind, and you think, boy, we've got to get through this. But then 5-6 years later, that client is still in the news.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the news cycle is the news cycle. It's going to evolve. The difference is, when I started in publicity early on in the late 90s, you were still dealing with a fax machine. Mm-hmm. You were still taping photos to a tear sheet and mailing them to newspapers and people around the country. Today, everything's instant. I always reference that we're living in an Amazon world. You order something right now, and in 2 hours, it's at your doorstep. Mm-hmm. Well, the same thing. You do something right now, 2 hours, it's on the internet.
Yeah.
So we're living in this space of instant gratification. Everybody's a reporter today because they have an iPhone. So they're all filming and recording, where before people went through broadcast journalism to become a journalist, to become a videographer. So, when I was also starting out, a journalist would call me, or a newspaper, they would ask for a photo pass. And you would give them a photo pass. First 3 songs, no flash, from the soundboard. We don't want you shooting up their nose, blah, 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 all these rules.
Right.
Well, today, photo passes don't even exist, because you buy a ticket in the front row, you buy a ticket in the 5th row. You got your iPhone, you're getting better coverage and footage of the artist performing, or photos, mm-hmm. than the guy with the camera with all the high-end lenses and everything that they've got, because they're so far back at the soundboard. There's a guy in the front row who's, got this brand new iPhone with the highest technology of camera on it, mm-hmm. and their photos look exactly the same as the professional guy sitting in the back.
Right.
So it's one of those things where technology has changed, our lifestyles have changed, everything has evolved, and so that's another reason why now that I'm more doing consulting and managing on projects, it's a lot different, because the days of your normal publicists are coming to an end, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Because everything is becoming social media driven. So social media, quote unquote, publicists have a role and a position within mm-hmm. the industry. But what we knew a publicist to be today is not what a publicist was then. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And you're talking about the cycles of news. I guess back then when he was going through that, and you were kind of shepherding the flock around in order to help him, keep a career, essentially, because, you can look at it in some ways he was canceled, and he was one of the original canceled artists, for that. But it did let him remain in the news cycle for years, because even 6 years later, whenever he went back on Monday Night Football, it was a media storm again.
True. It was, and again, the cycle was very short at that point, because again, it's all about the flavor of the day and mm-hmm. what's hot in the news cycle, and so when you have your return, you're going to have those few folks that will come out, do that story, and then it goes away. Yeah. Because there's something else that's more topical. Yeah. But you're right. It does come back out, and you're like, oh gosh, this again. But you're also understanding that that's pretty much the news cycle. You've got people of all walks of life that are journalists. Yeah. And so different things are going to spark the idea of a news story in different people. So, and you're never going to control the universe. You're never going to control everybody. So you just have to roll with it. And in Hank's world, when I came on board during that Elmira Club record, you have to remember, Hank Williams Jr. was not being played on radio mm-hmm. at that time. So when I took over his publicity and his marketing, the whole focus was, okay, how do we continue to build a brand and enhance the brand, because we don't have radio to push the agenda. Yeah. Where today, we've got TikTok if you don't have radio. Today you've got different social media platforms. Back then in 98, 99, 2000, 2001, those early days of trying to figure out where we were going to go.
Yeah.
During that time period, you didn't have a TikTok or a Facebook. You didn't have any other platforms besides radio and television and typical press.
Yeah. Do you think that radio still rules?
Radio is very important in our format.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
You cannot name me one artist today that has had success or launched a career through any other means that is still sustained and still out there having that same success, unless they have had radio play.
Yeah. You're talking about this, and it made me think about Lil Nas X and how he was such a phenomenal talent or whatever on TikTok, and he had millions and millions of views, but it wasn't until Billy Ray Cyrus came along and radio picked that song up that it became the longest lasting number one song in the history of all mankind music.
Yeah, absolutely. But you said it best. What was the catalyst that finally started to push it to the masses? Radio. So, you can have all of the followers that you want on any platform, which is phenomenal. And it gives you a great base and it gives you a great launching pad. Mm-hmm. But if you still don't hear it on the radio, whether it's Sirius XM, a syndicated radio show, terrestrial radio, you're not getting to the fan because they're not looking online to discover a lot of music. Fans want to hear what's trendy. They want to hear what their friends are saying is cool. Right. Have you heard this? So the way that the word travels is through people hearing something they like and telling their friends.
Yeah.
It's no different than when we were younger, and I hate to say that like we're getting old, but when we were
Kurt, we are.
When we would listen to terrestrial radio before satellite radio, and we loved a song, what was the first thing we did? We either called the radio station and requested it again, mm-hmm. or we went out and bought the cassette or the CD before anything else because you wanted to be able to play it whenever you wanted.
Right.
Okay? It actually took you doing something to hear that song again. It wasn't instant. You had to call the radio station and say, hey, will you play XYZ song? I loved it. Well, they weren't going to play it back to back or put it in the playlist in an hour. You had to stay listening till you could hear it again.
Right.
So people were more tuned to hearing new songs and hearing radio or songs and artists that they normally wouldn't be paying attention to on the radio because we were waiting for that song to come back. So at that point, we were discovering new music that way. They back announced and front announced songs. This is, He Stopped Loving Her Today from George Jones. Mm-hmm. That's, Martina McBride. This is Reba McEntire.
Right.
That's Dolly Parton. That's Hank Williams Jr. So all of a sudden you weren't guessing who the artists were. You weren't guessing the name of the song. You were lucky when they'd say we're going to play you 12 in a row this hour.
Right.
And you got 12 songs, but they still back announced and front announced. Mm-hmm. You knew who was coming up. Mm-hmm. And so today they're trying to cram so many songs in that they're just playing songs and you have to Shazam them or you have to use technology to figure out who was that because I liked it a lot because they're not really back announcing and front announcing because it takes too much time. You have to have radio to further a long-lasting career.
Right.
So you see what I'm saying? So it's a double-edged sword. You have to have one to sustain the other.
Yeah.
And so, I hear some artists, after they get a record deal and after it's gone through 4 or 5 album cycles and they're out making great money and they're having a great time, there's 2 buses on the road, 3 trucks, all this stuff. God, I have a horrible record deal. They're screwing me. They're this, they're that. And I sit there and I go, whoa. Who invested the first $1 million in you 5 years ago? Mm-hmm. Well, you're making this money because those people believed in your talent. Prior to that, nobody gave you a chance.
Right.
So don't look the gift horse in the mouth and be knocking the guys that are allowing you to do what you're doing because they're giving you radio hits. And yes, there might be some economics that aren't in your favor at this point, but they weren't in the record label's favor when they started, because they could have lost $1 million, $2 million, $5 million in a heartbeat if the records and the singles that they put out on you flopped.
Yeah, going to radio is really expensive. Trying to do a radio tour and get those spins, it's not a cheap process for anyone.
No, not at all, because, people spend a lot of money making a great record. This is the part of the business that I wish they would teach more students and more people about our business, is the fact that, you go spend $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, whatever you're going to spend on making a great record with, A-list musicians, all this stuff. And then you come out and you go, I don't have any money to promote it. If nobody knows it's available, nobody's going to buy it. So therefore, you spend all this money to create a great record, but you have no way of telling the people. Right. And at the same time, if you go after radio, to your point seconds ago, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
You have to spend a lot of money. It's not just hiring radio promoters to promote your song. Mm-hmm. It's, I've got to manufacture singles, or I've got to use Play MPE or CDX to distribute my single to radio. Those two things cost. Then I've got to go visit radio stations so they know who I am. It means if I don't play guitar, I've got to take a guitar player. That means I've got a couple flights that I've got to pay for, a couple hotel rooms, several meals I've got to pay for. Oh, my radio promotion guy's got to go with me so he can introduce me to the program director, music director at the station. So now there's 3 flights, not just 2. I've got to take those program directors out to dinner so they'll actually like me and know who I am, because they're going to spend some quality time versus, hi, I'm here to play a song for you at the station, and then you leave, and they don't remember your name when you leave.
Right.
So all those costs are added. Then you have to think about, what is your promotional tools that you're going to use? Do I need a music video? Do I need which is a concept video? Do I need an acoustic video? What do I need for my Facebook and social media postings? Now I've got to hire a social media manager to go make sure that I'm tagging all of the radio stations I visited and I'm getting the right photos to the right people. All of those things cost money.
Yeah.
And that's all part of promoting a single, because all those things are tied back to you're building your brand. And so when all of a sudden you look at that, you're going, it's not a cheap business. And I'm like, when people come to me and they talk to me and I tell them these things, they're like, we had no idea. And I said, I get it. That's why I want you to know. I'd rather scare the hell out of you right now, tell you the truth.
Right.
So you don't mortgage your house. You don't do something and then all of a sudden regret it later, because you're never digging yourself out of the hole, because, Johnny or Molly wanted a star and they had what it took, in your opinion, and therefore you gave it your all, and all of a sudden now you're bankrupt.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not fair to those moms and dads who work so hard, or the grandparents who say, here, I want to try this. So we're going to give you our $100,000, our last savings. Can we do this? And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Save the money, because that's not enough money that's going to get you around the bases.
Right.
You're going to get to first base or second base, and you're going to be out of money, and then you're not going to be able to get all the way home, and it's going to hurt you worse. So, there's a lot of pieces about the business. Like, I have a website called KirtWebsterConsultant.com, and I have all of that information there about the business and how managers work, how booking agents work, how song publishing works, how do you get a radio promoter? A lot of that information is in very simplistic form, because I've seen too many grandparents come to town and lose everything.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen too many people come and feel like, oh my gosh, I came to Nashville and I got screwed over, or I got taken for X amount of dollars. And I look back and I go, you might have, but part of that is the fact that you didn't educate yourself on how the business works. So don't blame the people that screwed you.
Right.
Also blame yourself, because had you done your research, you would know what to be looking for. People get so enamored with celebrity and the excitement of our business that they forget that it is a business.
Right.
And so, I tell people all the time, do some research.
Yeah, please.
Make some phone calls.
Please.
Ask the questions.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's for your own good.
Yeah. What are your hours? What's like a normal day for you? Like, do you work from 7 a.m. to midnight every single day? How does your life work?
I do not get into the office until at least 9 a.m. And that's on purpose, because I learned with all the time zones, I work later in the evening than I do early in the morning, because I'm in Nashville in Central Time. So the only thing that's ahead of me right now is New York. You follow me?
Right.
So I'm only an hour away. So if I call somebody at 10 a.m., it's okay, because their day's still fully ahead of them. If I start my day at 7 a.m., which is what I did early on, well, it's only 5 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast.
Right.
I can't call anybody. I can't do any work until 10 a.m. my time, which is 8 o'clock their time.
Yeah, makes sense.
So at the end of the day, I was all focused on getting up early and going to the office and doing all these great things, but then I couldn't work because nobody was taking my call. Nobody was in the office. I'm like, what do I do now? So what I do is I get to the office around 9 o'clock, and first thing I do is check my email, see if I've got to return any calls from the day before.
Right.
And then it's about research, it's planning, strategizing, checking in with the clients, figuring out what has to be dealt with and what's on fire and what's not, and then just rolling through the day and getting it all done. 6 o'clock typically is when everybody else goes home and shuts down. Typically, I've got a dinner meeting or I've got something I've got to do with other clients in the evening, whether it's they're playing the Grand Ole Opry or they're playing a show somewhere, or we just strictly have a phone call and a recap of certain things. And that's not every day, but it's a lot of days.
Yeah.
So our days, there are days I'm in the office until 6 o'clock and we're done. There are times I don't get home till midnight.
Yeah.
It just all varies based off what the needs are. We are not a Monday through Friday job because our artists are touring Fridays and Saturdays. My typical day in my week doesn't start on Monday and end on Friday. It's pretty much every day of the week.
And all the time.
And all the time.
Yeah.
You just don't know what's gonna rise.
Yeah. How many, do you know, just offhand, how many shows that you produce? Because I know you produce some really large shows in Nashville, and around the country, of course. But do you know how many that you actually produced yourself?
I do not know how many shows I've produced. I've never kept track of that. I always, this is the funny part of something that I tell people is I'm like, I do funerals well.
I want to bring that up.
I've had to orchestrate, 8 or 9 massive funerals, everybody from Carl Perkins to Jim Ed Brown to George Jones, Merle Kilgore, June Carter Cash, Johnny Cash. I mean, you name some artists Freddie Fender that I've represented, and they happen to pass on my watch, and all of a sudden, now I'm in the thick of dealing with the memorials, the live television portions of the memorials, the artist side of the memorials, everything, the internments, all of that stuff. And so, that's one thing that I get a lot of calls for still to this day from people going, so-and-so passed away. Can you give me some advice? What do we need to do first? And I'll walk them through, okay, here's how these pieces will play. And here's how you need to focus on these areas, and know that these people are going to come out of the woodworks, and you need to be very careful. And people are going to try to manipulate the family into doing this, but that's the wrong move. So steer them in this direction. And, believe it or not, it's not as easy as going to a funeral home and picking out a casket and saying, okay, we're going to have a visitation on Tuesday and the funeral is going to be on Wednesday, like a typical family. I mean, when you're dealing with celebrity, there's a lot of moving parts, because depending on if they're a Grand Ole Opry member, if they're a Hall of Fame member, if what's happening, you've got obligations that you have to make sure are fulfilled, not only for the family, but to some of the organizations that you represented or they represented. So, there's a lot of moving parts. When you talk about producing events, a funeral is an event. I mean, there's a lot of orchestration that goes into that. Then, I've worked on, as a side producer, if you will, on several events in Nashville. And then I've produced several major events in Nashville and beyond. One was the George Jones farewell concert 10 years ago in 2013, the year that he died. We started putting together, it was going to be his last concert ever at the Bridgestone Arena. And I was sitting at the house with him, and he looked at me and said, "Son, I really don't care what you're going to do for that show. I'm not going to be there." I said, "What, George?" He said, "Yeah, I'm going to go to the other side, and I just won't be there. So you do what you want to do." And I'm like, "You are absolutely crazy."
Wow.
And a month later, he had passed. He knew. He just, so, me and Nancy Jones and a small team of people got together. We had like 117 artists on that show.
Wow.
It stayed on time. And we had everybody from Megadeth to members of Styx to Kid Rock to all the way George Strait and Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson. I mean, it was the spectrum of rock meets country, and everybody came for the love of George Jones, and it was phenomenal. And, fast forward, I was part of Kenny Rogers' final farewell show at Bridgestone, where we united Kenny and Dolly for the very last time on stage. And it became an unbelievable television moment that aired a couple years ago on CBS. And also was part of a documentary bio type show on Kenny Rogers. Those were moments of greatness, of saying, look at what we were able to produce and create.
Yeah.
Most recently, I produced a multi-artist show honoring Lee Greenwood for his 40 years of hits. Yeah. And we're producing right now, and it'll air here this year on television, the George Jones Still Playing Possum Music and Memories of George Jones, the 10th anniversary of his passing celebration, with Dierks Bentley, Winona, Brad Paisley, Jamie Johnson. I mean, just a great grouping of artists. Tanya Tucker, Justin Moore, Sam Moore. A lot of people are going to come together and sing George Jones songs. There's going to be some cool moments. Jamie Johnson and Winona are going to sing Golden Ring, and Sarah Evans and Easton Corbin are going to do I Was Country When Country Wasn't Cool. And so that will be on television to keep the memory of George Jones and his music alive. Yeah. So those kind of projects are fun to me because they have a beginning and they have an end. So you know what you're starting with, and you know what your end game is. And it's all that middle stuff that becomes the pain in the rear that we have to deal with. But we get through it. And when you see the end game of what finally came about, you're going, okay, everything was worth it. Yeah. Because I see the end game. And now I'm loving this. Right. So
is that your most proud moment, was the George Jones Memorial? Is that in ranking in top 10, let's say, of a career status, is that near the top or at the top?
That was one of those top, defining moments. I will say probably the biggest defining moment that I would say that from a personal and a heart perspective, number one would be getting Jim Ed Brown and the Browns into the Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah,
because Jim Ed had been diagnosed with cancer. He had overcome the cancer. It came back, and I got the phone call to bring him to the CMA for Sarah Traherne, the CEO, to let him know that he had been voted into the Hall of Fame. Yeah. And so I told him we had to go to the CMA, and I got his daughter, and I said, we've got to do an interview down there. Will you bring him and meet me there? So we got there, and make a long story short, we walked into Sarah's office, and he had a ball cap on, and he sat down, and she said, okay, so you ready to go do your interview? And he said, yes. And she said, well, I've got a couple of questions I wanted to ask you and a few things to tell you first about what we're going to talk about. And she said, first one is congratulations, you're the next member of the Country Music Hall of Fame. And literally, he fell back in his chair and his ball cap flew back, and it was like, what? And it was a tearful, emotional moment. And then he was sworn to secrecy because he wasn't allowed to tell anybody until the official announcement. We did that. We had a little party that night at his house after the announcement. And then he got sick again. And he was not going to live till November to be able to get the medallion around his neck and actually become a member. Because how that works is the CMA makes the announcement. As soon as the CMA is done with the announcement, the Hall of Fame takes over, and they start planning the medallion ceremony. And when this medallion is placed over your neck, that's officially when you become a member of the Hall of Fame. You're a member elect during that time period of the announcement till the medallion ceremony. So he was a member elect, but he wasn't an official member. And I got the phone call from Becky and from Becky, his wife, and Kim, his daughter, and said, listen, Dad's probably got a week left. Unfortunately, the doctors are telling us, and we want you to come up to the hospital and see him. And I came up and I patted his hand, and we were talking, and little Brenda Lee had just come up and was laying in the bed with him, and they were talking about old Arkansas TV shows and things that they had done, and it was a very cute and special moment. And I said, well, Jim Ed, I did what I promised you. I got you in the Hall of Fame, and I'm so excited. And he just smiled from ear to ear, and Brenda, being a member of the Hall of Fame, was like, yes, well, I'm so proud of you. And it was a great moment. And I walked out of there going, but he's not a member.
Right.
He's not a member. And so I called Sarah Trahern, and I said, Sarah, we need to do something. Is there a way we can do the medallion at the hospital? And she said, let me call Kyle Young at the Hall of Fame and see. So she called Kyle, and Kyle's like, it's unprecedented. We've never done it. And does Kirt even have the authority to make this phone call? It became a controversial thing.
Right.
And it was like, what? We're trying to do something for a man who's dying. What?
Right. A legend.
You know, and so Sarah called me back, and she said, well, Kyle, first off, asked if you had the authority to make this phone call. And she said, I know you represent Jim Ed, but is this what the family would want? I said, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hung up from Sarah, picked up the phone. I called Kim and Becky. I'm like, here's the questions being asked. Is this what you want? And they were both in tears on the phone going, absolutely.
Yeah.
I said, okay, just want to make sure that if you get that phone call behind the scenes saying, we got a phone call from Kirt Webster, are you okay with this? That we're all on the same page. And
right.
They're like, Kirt, of course we are. I'm like, okay. So I called Sarah back, said, I've talked to the family. Yes. Okay. So then another phone call went to Kyle. Kyle said, we only can do it if we have a sitting, living member of the Hall of Fame come, because they have to present the medallion. Okay. Well, on my PR roster, I had Brenda Lee. I had several Hall of Fame members. So it was like dollar prayer, dollar friend. I got on my phone and I started dialing around. I called Bill Anderson, and Bill said, I said, 1:00 today or tomorrow. I forget the timing of it. I said, can you do this? And he said, well, I have a dentist appointment at that time, but that dentist appointment can wait. I will cancel that. Don't you worry. I will be there. I picked up the phone. I said, that part, check it off your list, Sarah. Bill Anderson is going to do it.
Yeah.
Great. She called Kyle. That was done. Kyle got the script of how they actually, what they read and how they induct. And in our minds, it was all set. Nobody was going to know anything. I believe Kyle or Sarah called Ricky Skaggs and a few other Hall of Fame members and people in the business or friends, Opry members at the time. I don't know if Ricky had been made a member or not at that point, the Hall of Fame, but he was an Opry member. And we all came around and walked into the room at the same time, and Jim Ed was laying there and with a big smile on his face. And I said, well, Jim, I brought some friends with me. And Sarah took over and said a few words. Kyle said a few words. And then all of a sudden, they just started in. And it was tears amongst the entire room.
Yeah.
And when Bill Anderson placed the medallion around Jim Ed's neck in that hospital bed, and everybody held hands, and then we sing, "Will the Circle Be Unbroken?"
Mm-hmm.
That right there was probably the number one highlight of my career and life.
Yeah.
Because I knew that it wasn't going to last long, and that he would go rest in peace, knowing that his music and his humanity and who he was as a person would live on forever as a Country Music Hall of Fame member, and that I knew in my heart, no matter what people thought, if I had authority or not, or what took place, I did what was right at the time.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I pushed the envelope to do something unprecedented that had never been done before and has still never been done since, because it was the right thing to do. To me, that's really what matters. And so that I know that, you know what, I did God's work.
Yeah.
No matter how religious somebody is or isn't out there, it was like, I knew that moment I was doing God's work, not my work.
Yeah.
And so, you know, then the fact that when I was, you know, a kid, I wanted Kenny and Dolly to perform again, because I always wanted to go see them in concert, and I never got to. I had to watch all the Real Love HBO specials and all the things that were on TV. And when I moved to Nashville and I got to start representing both of them, to know that I was the catalyst and the one who actually put them two back together on that stage for the very last time, and we got to see that final performance. You know, that ranks in the top 5 because I moved to Nashville with a hope and a dream to work for Kenny and Dolly.
Yeah.
I worked for them. I lived my dream. I got that done. But to know that then I closed out that dream and put them together for the last time in October of 2017. And at that point, they never performed ever again. And poor Kenny passed away subsequently a few years later. It was like, okay, you know, it's a perfect example of, if you dream it, you can live it, you can do it. And that's kind of the way that I look at my careers. That was a pipe dream. I'm 14, 15, 16 years old in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm like, I'm going to town to work for Kenny and Dolly. My mom and dad are like, yeah, sure. I am one day. And all of a sudden it happened.
Yeah.
And then knowing that the very last time they got to perform together was that moment. And I'll back up just a quick second. I got to see them perform one other time together, and that was when I was executive producer of the Dolly Parton Smoky Mountain Rise telethon that we won an Emmy for. Was when the wildfires happened. We got one day out of her schedule to put this telethon on, and I'm like, you can't have this without Kenny and Dolly. And I literally called Kenny and said, Kenny, we're taping this on this day live. Can you be here? And he said, well, I'm in Detroit the night before on the Christmas tour. That's my one day off, and I'm in Pennsylvania the next day. I'll get the bus driver to get me to Nashville, and I'll get to Pennsylvania. Tell Dolly I'll be there.
Nice.
So knowing that, okay, all of a sudden they did the telethon as just like a fast, impromptu, throw together thing, because we had to raise money to help all those wildfire victims. You know, it was a great moment to say, aha, they did it. I would have never thought that a few years later, I would have been the catalyst to put them together for the final time. But all in all, I knew that I did that, and that was another highlight of my career, because it put the bow, if you will, tied the bow on the end of that part of my career.
Yeah.
Like, that's why I came to town. That's how that part of that career ended. And now I can do other things.
What is it about the growth of Nashville that, did you expect it, first of all? And second of all, do you have like the hotspot, quote unquote, that you like to go to places? Well, when I moved to town, it was so wonderful, because everything was based off of the 3 streets, 16th, 17th, and 18th, known as Music Row. You could literally walk from house
to house, and those houses were turned into office buildings, and you could pretty much get all your business done on 3 streets, whether it was banking with the music industry, whether it was talking to a management company, whether it was talking to the booking agents. Everybody was in these little houses and turned into office buildings, and it was very easy to work within. Everybody knew each other. It was very simple. As time has gone on, those houses have become big condo complexes. There's just been a lot, if you will, of growth on Music Row. That Music Row isn't Music Row anymore.
Right.
That's just the realities.
Right.
Now it's very industrialized. There's still a few homes there, like Crystal Gale still has her office and studio in a home building. There are others that still do, but not everybody. Right. And so seeing that grow and everything expand out, it just is kind of like, wow, what happened? Yeah. But then also, COVID has turned everything into people working from home and people getting rid of offices altogether, because we are a relationship business and we are very much a lunch and dinner type business where you go and meet and get your deals done that way. So there are a lot of there's been a lot of growth that way. The scary part is looking at downtown where you pull off the freeway off of 40 and you go, there are 7 skyscrapers. Not skyscrapers, cranes in the air, building these skyscraper hotels in these buildings. I'm like, wait a minute. We never had a skyline like that. We never had New York City or Austin or LA with all these big buildings in one small area. We all just knew the Batman building. Right. You want to get to you want to go to downtown Nashville? You want to get to the honky tonks? Look for the Batman building. I was like, done. And so that was it. I've been blessed. I work with Steve Smith, who owns Tootsie's, Honky Tonk Central, Rippy's. Kid Rock's, several honky tonks all through downtown. And I've worked with him now 20 plus years, and the growth of what he's been able to build has been absolutely phenomenal. Yeah. I mean, he was a single guy owner, if you will, of establishments, and just started growing it from one thing to the next. And all of a sudden, like, oh, we're going to take over this location. We're going to take over that one. And all of a sudden, his businesses started booming. And then all of a sudden we're expanding Tootsie's to 3 floors and we're growing, we're building. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is phenomenal. And so now when we sit and have our meetings and we talk about how much things have grown and what has happened, it's what are we doing next? Yeah. And what are the new pieces? You've got on Broadway now, a lot of the buildings are celebrity-driven bars and clubs. You've got John Rich's, you've got Luke Bryan's, you've got Jason Aldean's, you've got Florida Georgia Line's, you got Miranda's. Most of the Kid Rock's, everything has a name on it now. Garth Brooks is getting ready to open his, and Eric Church has got one launching. So, before it was just business guys owned a honky tonk. Yeah, Roberts. Now it's become part of the music establishment of their enterprise. Those brands are now taking over those pieces because we've become the bachelorette capital of the world. The TV show Nashville back in the day opened a lot of those doors. It made Nashville look fun. So all those seasons of that show, whether you liked it or not, it really opened up a lot of those doors and people paid attention. So there's been so much growth, and, with growth becomes problems. Yeah. Whether it's high priced hotels, whether it's, crime, whether it's whatever, but it's in every city. So you can't put the negative and bring it down because you've grown and are creating positive moves. Right. You have to look at it and go, it's part of it.
For me, because I've been in Florida for so long, when the NFL decided to hold their draft there on 2nd Avenue, or Broadway, rather, and thousands and tens of thousands of people showed up for that draft, I thought, man, we have really entered a new world.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. No, we definitely have, expanded into a more non just country enterprise. We are now seen by corporations as the place to be.
Yeah.
So we're seeing conventions and big events come to town. They're talking about rebuilding this stadium so we could host the Super Bowl one year. When they're starting talking about things of that nature, all of a sudden it's like, whoa,
it's on.
We're no longer fanfare as we knew it. We're
right.
where you're going to pig barns and signing autographs.
Right.
We're well beyond that. Now, don't get me wrong. I loved me some fanfare.
Oh, me too.
I love the old days when it was pig barns and every artist went and signed autographs. Those were the good days.
Oh man.
But now it's so commercialized and so big. The CMA have done a phenomenal job with expanding it and bringing so many stages and so many artists and so many opportunities for people to be heard. But now it's just like, it used to be all contained at the fairgrounds. Now it's a citywide event.
Yeah.
And there's, again, pluses and minuses to it. It's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where you go, wow, they have really taken this and grown it. I remember, you have to think back, fanfare started with three little ladies that ran Loretta's fan club, the Johnson sisters, in Conway Twitty getting together and doing a little show for the fans. And they had a company called IFCO, the International Fan Club Organization. And it just grew from there to where all the fan clubs started participating and they got their artists to come, and all of a sudden fanfare was born.
Yeah.
And now it's massive. So, again, we've become a corporate world where everything's bigger.
Yeah.
And again, you take the goods with the bads. You can't knock it, but then take the money from it. You got to embrace it and say, whatever happens, let's go. If it's wrong, we got to fix it. If it's right, we got to win it. So let's go. And essentially that's where we have become, such a notable city that everybody's watching what we're doing and wanting to come here.
Yeah. Well, Kirt, I really do appreciate your time today, and just want to say I appreciate you and thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Nashville Hype Podcast. I'm your host, Paul King. You can find us at thenashvillehype.com. We're on all the socials, and the podcast can be heard on Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeart, and many other places. Thank you so much for tuning in.